Okay, so welcome everyone for the second webinar, and many of you have been with us from this first webinar which started on the 18th of September with an Inception webinar. You are already familiar to the series of webinar, but since you are joining from across the world, and so I thought that I will very quickly run through what we have done so far in the last 3 weeks. And before I introduce you to the speakers of today's webinar and also the topic that we are going to focus for today's webinar. So many of you already have this, I think, schedule, how we plan to organize the series of webinar, which has been hosted by IIT Guwahati with several partners. Today, one of the speakers who is with us is also a partner to this webinar, Emanuele Fantini. We have a project with them, and so they are also a part of this webinar. I would like to very quickly tell you that we had our first webinar, which was on the 18th of September, where we had an Inception webinar, and the panel discussion was on fundamentals of hydrodiplomacy. A keynote address were given by the director of IIT Guwahati, where he highlighted the importance of this particular topic, particularly in the context of an academic institution, and also that probably to best of our knowledge, is it the first time an academic institution which is in India and also probably in South Asia is initiating a webinar, which is a series of webinar focusing on interdisciplinary subject. As you can see here, we had an eminent panelist, and we had excellent discussion on several topics. What we tried to understand through this particular panel discussion was mainly to highlight how do we define hydrodiplomacy? Why do we at all need such hydrodiplomacy? And how does it basically helps in understanding the conflicts and cooperation around transboundary river basins. We touched upon some of the very important topics, which includes power, included role of diplomats, gender, several other such issues, which we started to delve in more detail with each of these webinars. Then we had, before we went to the first webinar, we had a bonus lecture. We called it bonus lecture because this was an overarching sort of a lecture which was given by Professor Roger Falconer, and his entire focus was on how can we have a holistic approach when we talk about water security, and trying to establish the link between water diplomacy and water security. After this particular lecture, we started our first webinar, which was on power in hydrodiplomacy, which we concluded on the 1st of October. And we had two speakers, Jeroen Warner and Sumit Vij. Sumit was the discussant of the session. If I can just tell you in a very short, or very briefly, what basically was the take home from this webinar was that there was this discussion that even now, although power plays such an important role in influencing hydrodiplomacy, but somewhere in water diplomacy literature, we do not really see it coming explicitly. So we say that the literature is kind of power shy. So there is a need for rigorous and in-depth analysis to explain and understand the role of power in water diplomacy. And also, once you understand what is the role, it will make it easy to also understand how it influences water policy-making processes and outcomes at transboundary scale, as well as at other multiple scales. So today this webinar, which is on communication and media in hydrodiplomacy, which is the second webinar of the series, is particularly interesting for us because we sometimes kind of neglect the role of one of the very, very important stakeholder, which is the media. And I also would say that they are very powerful because, the narratives around hydrodiplomacy can actually set through this water through media. So in this particular section, we will be focusing mainly on how communication and media can play an important role in influencing hydrodiplomacy. And we have two speakers here. We have Emanuele Fantini. Emanuele is an academician, and he is a part of IIT Delft Institute for Water Education in the Netherlands. But Emanuele is also somebody we can say, as a practitioner, because he has been working very closely with the media in the Nile Basin. One of his very interesting work, which is very fascinating and which actually inspired even us as I work on Brahmaputra Basin to kind of adopt that approach, is a kind of is a postcast that he has initiated, which is the Sources of the Nile. If you haven't watched it, you must watch it, because it's a very excellent and very well done podcast where you really get to hear the voices of different stakeholders living across the Nile Basin, upstreamers and downstreamers. And when you hear it, you really get to see that how opinions may be similar or even different. So welcome, Emanuele. I hope you can hear me clearly now. And thank you so much for joining us from the Netherlands today. The discussant of this session is Joydeep Gupta. Those who are in the media house, I'm sure we do not need to introduce Joydeep. Joydeep is the South Asia director of the Third Pole. Joydeep research and writing is mostly around environmental issues. He raises a lot of challenging questions. If you are following Third Pole, I am sure you know that it is one of the best, I think, online platform where we see a lot of articles coming out related to challenging and pressing environmental issues. His work focuses on issues related to climate change, water, biodiversity, and sustainable development. So Joydeep will be the discussant of this session, while Emanuele will make a presentation around his experience of Nile Basin, and also overall what role basically media could play in influencing hydrodiplomacy. Rules are known to everybody. The participants can start typing their questions from now on. You have a chat box, you can type your questions. We will take all the questions after the session presentations are over. Emanuele will be the speaker. I would request Emanuele, if possible, to conclude your presentation in 30 to 35 minutes, followed by a discussion from Joydeep. Once this is over, we will look at the questions that has come, and I will moderate the question and answer session. So with that, welcome both the speakers, and I will first hand it over to Emanuele to please present your views on the subject, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can start sharing yours. Yes, over to you, Emanuele.
Thank you very much, Anamika. And apologies for my unstable connection. I don't know what is happening. Here in the Netherlands, we are always not working very well. So I will briefly put my video on to say hello to everyone, and then we'll go back to the podcast modality in which you can only hear my voices. As my bandwidth seems low, Anamika, I was wondering if it's better that, because I shared my presentation also with you, I just send it to your email to upload it. No problem. And if it's okay for you.
Yes, sure. Give me 1 minute. I'm just going to download it. Yeah. Did you send it to me just now, Emanuele?
In the Gmail.
I haven't received it yet.
Or I can go. Okay.
Can you just mail it to me now again, please?
I think it's going through.
Joydeep, in the meantime, if you do not mind me asking a question, because there is already a question for you. And the question is, in many cases, we see the newspaper block, talking about hydrodiplomacy, and that without much scholarship. for example, the role of Sikkim and hydropower, and for example, about Teesta. So how do you basically look at it? Do you really think that is actually hydrodiplomacy, or there is some flaw in such kind of hydrodiplomacy?
Well, I think it's probably best if we have a discussion on this rather than a question and answer, because there are many ways of looking at this. One is I would request the person who has asked the question to define explicit scholarship. And I would also want to know, when you're talking about the role of Sikkim in hydrodiplomacy, Sikkim is a state. So are we talking about diplomacy between different states within one sovereign territory, that is India? If we are doing that, then yes, this makes sense. If we are talking about hydrodiplomacy between sovereign nations, whether it's India and Bangladesh, or India and China, or even China and Bangladesh, then states legally cannot play a role. They don't have a role to play. So it would be very helpful if I could get some clarity on this. What I will say is that I do not hold a candle to the entire media. It's not possible. The media is too big and too heterogeneous a beast for anybody to be able to put them together in one box. That is not possible. It is entirely possible that there are media reports which are relatively uninformed, and there are media reports which are very well informed. So again, what I would urge, and this is a problem that we very often face with non-journalists, is business of putting all the media together, lumping them into one box. I mean, that would be the equivalent of lumping every country in the world into one box, or every bureaucrat in a country into one box. It simply doesn't happen. It doesn't work that way. So unless I get a specific example of what the questioner wants to talk about, I don't know how to answer that question.
Okay, and I am waiting for Emanuele to, I can see that he kind of disappeared. I don't know what is going on with his connection. Apologies to the participant, just give us like 3 minutes time. I'm just trying to give him a call and sort it out.
Okay, meanwhile, what I'm going to do is to start talking about the Teesta, since the question has been raised on the Teesta.
Please go ahead. You can probably introduce the topic also.
So there has been an issue over the Teesta within India for many years, especially when the first set of hydro projects in Sikkim were announced and planned, and in West Bengal were announced and planned. There was a lot of opposition. There continues to be opposition from the local population. The government of India and the government of Sikkim, and to a certain extent the government of West Bengal, overrode that opposition and went along. And what happened actually there is that the voice of the people did not get the importance that it deserved. So this, in a webinar on hydrodiplomacy, I would say this was the most undiplomatic thing that happened within India. There is an international implication of what happened. Because of the whole series of dams that have been built on the Teesta in Sikkim and in West Bengal, by the time the Teesta reaches anywhere near the Bangladesh border, in fact anywhere near Gojaldoba, as soon as it reaches, it is no longer, except in monsoon months, it is no longer carrying enough water for a water sharing pact to be very meaningful. I know that Bangladesh is aware, the Bangladesh government is aware of this, and which is why the Tista Pact that was drafted did not put any quantifiable number on how much water Bangladesh should get. It simply said 50-50 of the water that reaches the border. But 50-50 of nearly zero is not going to be very helpful. So there are problems there which need to be sorted out at a much wider level. There are problems which that have been created because A, the locals were not consulted, and B, the various project proponents made assumptions on water flow that have proved to be incorrect. They have also made assumptions on electricity demand that have proved to be incorrect. In many of the hydro projects on the Tista in Sikkim today, it makes no economic sense to run those power plants 24 hours a day, because except during the peak hours of 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., if you run that power plant, your cost of generating electricity is higher than the price that you're going to get for that electricity. So we have built 7 large hydro stations on the Tista, able to generate. We are not generating because there's no demand for it. We have created a very weird situation, which has also got us into all sorts of diplomatic problems in Bangladesh. And who knows what's going to happen. To me, the solution to this lies in discussion. And when people talk about diplomacy and hydro diplomacy, I will talk about this later during the discussion. I do not see this as diplomacy between people who are seen as diplomats within quotes. I see it as much wider.
Thank you, Joydeep. Emanuele, how are we doing? Can you share your screen?
Okay, now I've joined from my telephone, but so I cannot. But the slides are.
You're not very loud. You have to speak a little louder, Emanuele.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah,
like
now
this?
it is better. Now it is better.
Okay, I think as in the so I sent you the my presentation.
No, I haven't.
Because now I'm joining from the telephone, so it will be easy if you can. You didn't get it?
No, I haven't. I haven't got it. I am just sending you an email. Can you please send this presentation as an attachment to that email so that there is no confusion?
Yeah, I did it. I guess it's a bit, the file is quite heavy because they are
so I will
mostly
wait for
photos.
It, Emanuele. In the meantime, may I request you to just start your discussion without the presentation slides, please?
Yes, yes, I can do this because anyway, they were just mostly photos. So,
please.
First of all, again, apologies for this. I'm very happy to be here with you, although only with my voice. And as today is the 9th of October, I would like to start with a story that happened in Italy 57 years ago, exactly on the 9th of October. Maybe you are familiar with the name of the Vajont. It was, it's a dam. It was a dam conceived in the 1920s, and that was eventually built between 1957 and 1960 in the north of Italy. At the time, and still now, it's one of the tallest dams in the world. And exactly 57 years ago, on October 9, 1963, during the initial filling of the dam, a landslide caused a sort of tsunami in the lake. And so 50 million cubic meters of water, what happened, overtopped the dam. There was a huge wave of more than 200 meters that destroyed completely villages and towns in the valley below, with almost 2,000 deaths. So the dam itself remained almost intact and is still there. You can still see it, but the valley below was completely flooded and destroyed in what is still considered nowadays one of the biggest human-made disaster ever. So why I'm telling this story? Because maybe the disaster could have been avoided if people, and particularly public authorities and technical elites involved in managing that project, would have paid more attention and would have acknowledged the reports that were made a few years before the disaster by a brave journalist. Her name was Tina Merlin. She was a journalist of the newspaper L'Unità, a newspaper that was the newspaper of the Communist Party. And the Communist Party at the time in Italy was the main opposition party under a Cold War scenario. So you could imagine there was a very strong Communist Party in Italy, and from the pages, the column of the main newspaper of the party, this journalist was denouncing the project, and she was giving voice to the concerns of the local population that knew that mountain was unstable. They were afraid of the mountains. And she also denounced the management, the management of the dam, either studies that were pointing at the geological instability of the mountains, and the management underestimated this factor. So the journalist Tina Merlin was brought to court. After several years, she was found completely innocent. But there were also other journalists, and particularly I'm thinking of Indro Montanelli, that at the time was one of the most influential Italian journalists, and he was also a vocal anti-communist. He was attacking the newspaper L'Unità, and he was denying any human responsibility in the disaster, saying that they were just politicizing that disaster. So this is a story through which I would like to introduce the topic of today and why. I will share today some lessons learned within a project called Open Water Diplomacy, Media Science, and Transboundary Cooperation in the Nile Basin. That was already mentioned by Anamika. Thank you in the introduction. Thank you very much. One of the reasons we started this project is that there is widespread agreement about the fact that media plays an important role in water conflicts and cooperation. And most of the time, this role is presented as a negative role. So the story of Tina Merlin and the Vaillant can be the classical idea that we have about brave journalists as watchdogs of the power, of the political power. Here, when it comes to media, to water diplomacy, journalists are rather presented, the media is rather considered, I would say, as a negative force. So there is this idea that journalists conflicts or they misrepresent scientific information, and therefore journalists need to be educated to cover, to convey positive and constructive messages. But of course, such picture, I think, has two short limits. First, the picture is based, this idea is based on anecdotal evidence. There are very little studies on the role of media in water conflict and cooperation, and that's why we engage in such a research, and that's why I'm very happy that also you are doing the same in the context of the Brahmaputra. Second, I think this idea that the media misrepresent reality and they don't and misrepresent scientific facts and information, it's only part of the picture, because I think it's also important to look at how scientists communicate, scientists, researchers, how they communicate and they present their work. So I would like to share three lessons and reflections, and I'm really also eager to learn from Deep what he thinks on the basis of his experience. I hope. Anamika, is it okay, the volume and the voice?
Yes, yes. Emanuele, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, so three lessons. The first one is about popular culture and emotions. Then my second lesson will be, the second reflection will be about politics and power, also to make a link to the previous meeting and to the previous webinar. And the third one will be about journalists and researchers. So first, lessons learned. The role of popular culture and emotions. I think that why we want to work and why people are eager to work with the media, because we have the idea that they shape the public understanding of topics such as water and international river management. But of course, I think one of the important lessons that we learn working in the Nile Basin is that ideas, representation, and understanding about water and rivers are deeply influenced by popular culture. And for instance, we had in February an event called Nile Pop, in which researchers and musicians on the stage of the Leiden Museum of Antiquities here in the Netherlands were discussing how the Nile has been framed and represented in popular culture, in music, in movies, in arts, poetry. I'm thinking, for instance, of research conducted by one of our students in water management and governance here at IHE Delft Institute for Water Education. Is an Ethiopian student, now graduated from the master, who wrote his thesis on popular songs in Ethiopia about the Nile and the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. And it clearly shows how the construction of the dam has changed the way the river is portrayed in Ethiopia in songs. From a river that was considered as a sort of traitor because it was flowing away the country without irrigating the Ethiopian land, as a river that is coming back to Ethiopia to contribute to prosperity and development of the country. And those narratives are key in shaping the way people think. It was also, for instance, describing how children at primary school learn and sing songs about the river, and how these contribute to shape ideas, and I would say also emotions about the river. So why I'm saying, and I'm focusing on emotion, I think, of course, when we think about art, movies, songs, that's what what this kind of artistic forms elicit, emotions. I think it's also important to reflect, and that's something we learn, again, also thanks to the work of Wondwas and Nietzsche Seide, which is another researcher, is also from Ethiopia, is working with us, and is doing the PhD exactly, his PhD research exactly on the role of emotions in water diplomacy. I think looking at the media, we could, I think we realized that how emotions cannot be separated from or took away from facts, from science. Even we ourselves, we were an Italian, Ethiopian, Sudanese, Egyptian researchers working together at analyzing and doing content analysis and discourse analysis of media narratives in mainstream media in Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan. And while discussing and commenting and trying to find patterns in those narratives, sometimes it was very easy. It was very difficult to detach our analysis from our background. Could be our disciplinary background, could be our national backgrounds. And sometimes clearly people were saying, now I'm not talking as researchers, now I'm talking rather as an Egyptian or as an Ethiopian. But on the other side, this was also an added value, because we realized, we learned how different background, different emotions. I mean, depending on your background, the same article, the same narrative can elicit very different emotions. And so I think this is an important lesson also for water diplomacy, because while you can negotiate quantity of water, cubic meters of water, and how to share and distribute them between different stakeholders, you cannot negotiate emotions, or you cannot negotiate the values that are also associated and to emotions. So I think there should be a preparatory work before engaging into negotiations, into water diplomacy, in order to learn about the emotions and the values that people associate to water, and try to see which of these emotions can facilitate a connection, a dialogue. Of course, I think that's a very challenging task, but I think it's essential to acknowledge this, that emotion values cannot be separated from facts, and that we have to take that into account when also negotiating in water diplomacy. So then the question is how to elicit and nurture and promote positive emotions that can facilitate connections, understanding, and collaboration. What we are trying to do, we will try to do this again by using popular culture, and particularly by using photography. And in the next month, we will start an online photo campaign, working with journalists, with photographers from different countries, called EverydayNile, with the idea of portraying a different or an alternative narratives, not the Nile as something which is contested and that should be shared between three countries. I'm talking about, of course, the the Blue Nile, Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt, but that's something that people, as a kind of presence in the everyday life of people, trying to see and to visualize how people, even in different countries, might be connected in similar ways and share similar emotions to the same river.
Emanuele,
So
sorry, I am interrupting, but I can take out your slides now. Tell me in which number slide I should be.
I'm at the slides which is called EverydayNile. So if you go quickly, you will see first photos about the.
Yeah.
That's the EverydayNile. Thank you. That's very timely because I like very much this photo that we choose as a iconic image of the campaign, because I think it represents very well the kind of work that you have to do when engaging with media and communication in water diplomacy. It's an activity on such a sensitive topics, working with journalists and communication. It's an art that requires equilibrium, they require acrobatics, and sometimes even somersaults, as you can see from, I hope, from the photo. And that brings me to the second point, which is in next slide. It's about the role of power and politics. I'm sure you discussed that in the previous webinar. I think it's important to recall that communication on water and rivers not shaped and is not only shaped by or shapes itself emotions, but communication and media are of course influenced and also try to influence material and political interest and process. So what we learn in our research on the Nile media is that narratives about the river cannot be understood outside the political context in which such narratives are produced and shared. For instance, during the Oromo protest in Ethiopia that a few years ago led to the resignation of the former Ethiopian Prime Minister Hailemariam Desalegn, so there were internal politics, demonstrations by students, by farmers, but the Nile and the GER, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, were brought into the picture by the claim that the Egyptian intelligence was behind those protests because they were trying to destabilize the country and cut the dam. So I don't have the elements to say whether it's right or wrong, but I think what is important here is to reflect on what kind of representation do we have of the river. Right? The river as a security, the dam as a security issue, national security issue. But so not only about, the dam is related to political events, and the river is connected to political events that have, in principle, at least materially or physically, nothing to share with the river. But it's also, of course, an issue of process. And here, the big elephants in the room is freedom of expression. So we, in working with journalists in the Nile Basin, we learned that, for instance, journalists were summoned by an Egyptian journalist in one of our first workshops, was telling us a story that once he visited the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, and he posted a selfie of himself standing in front of the with the reservoir and the dam behind him, and he was smiling in the selfie, and he was summoned by the police saying, "But why did you post such a selfie in which you are smiling, standing on what we consider a disgrace for our country, this dam that Ethiopian is building on the Nile River?" We have other journalists that were summoned by authorities after attending our meeting and presenting their work, or journalists that were denied visa. So indeed, and that's why also I fully agree with Joydeep about there's not such a thing as the media, the journalist. It's a pluriverse. You have good journalists, bad journalists, as also the story of the Vaillant tell us. There was a journalist that was trying to uncover and raise and bring give voice to the concern of the people, and there were other journalists that were accusing her of manipulating the reality for political reasons. So, but what I want to say here is that this is indeed a big issue, freedom of expression. And I think one of the bottom line, if we want to improve the way the media are talking about the river and water, ultimately, what we have to do is to strive for more freedom of expression, because that's also, I think that's indeed the big elephant in the room. For other experience, and for instance, we wanted to have a joint report by journalists from different countries. So putting together journalists from different countries to produce some joint reports. But this, for instance, proved to be too sensitive, again, for political reasons, because if you are an Egyptian journalist, you cannot take a selfie in front of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Imagine how public authorities would look at you if you authored a report which is with an Ethiopian or a Sudanese journalist on the same dam, which is critical about the position of one or more government. What would happen to the journalist? So, yeah, this is, I think, another a very good example. So what if you can move on the next slide, it's a slide about a popular hashtag. They went viral in Ethiopia last February during the discussion and negotiation and polemics between Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan about the dam. So that's the person that you see in the picture is the Ethiopian Minister for Water and Electricity. And during a press conference, indeed, you see the media, when a journalist asked him, but okay, so are you going to fill the dam in July? We were in February. Are you going to fill the dam, start filling the reservoir of the dam in July? He said, of course, we will start filling the dam. It's my dam. And this assertive statement became a viral hashtag. So why I'm putting this, I'm putting this tweet here and using it as example to say what. So what we learn is that in our research is that when we talk about power, in terms of power, we look at power and politics in media and communication about the river. In the case of the Nile, we found that journalists tend to quote most frequently politicians 72% of the articles that we examined were quoting politicians, followed by what we would consider technical people, like government officials, diplomats, or representative of technical ministers. And there was 38% of the articles. And then we have experts and scientists in 30% of the articles. So the most frequently heard voices are those of the politicians. And what is it? I find this interesting that also in a way the social media that are considered you often are presented as instruments to allow a broader discourse and a broader conversation, in the end tend to reinforce voices that are already heard in the or narratives that are already mainstream, like in this case the statement of the Ethiopian Ministry of Water, who became an hashtag of the entire social media in Ethiopia. So this is about politics and powers and what kind of voices are heard in the debate. And the next slide, again, to recall this, is is one of example of this hashtag "It's my dam" or "It's his dam," because the dam indeed in Ethiopia has been linked and still is linked to the legacy and the memory of specific ones, in particular one leader, namely the former Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Meles Zenawi, who laid the first stone of the dam just a year before his premature death. So, but and to conclude this this second point on power and politics, I'm also interested in to learn Joydeep's experience on these points and similar on these similar points, but also was thinking what kind of research you might want to do in the case of the Brahmaputra. I think it would, for me, also thinking about emotions, the emotions that I was discussing in the first point, it would be interesting either to go big and see, for instance, do some analysis in terms of big data, in terms of words, keywords, and emotions that are associated in to the Brahmaputra, the river, or to water in social media. So doing some of this kind of cloud analysis to see, and big data analysis to see, to taste a bit the feeling of public opinion in social media, or rather go micro and dive and focus on histories of hashtag to really understand how specific actors, can be a water diplomat, can be a researcher, or can be a journalist, him or herself, use social media, and what kind of use and what kind of debates, and so doing kind of ethnography of digital ethnography, social media debates on water, on the Brahmaputra. And this discussion on voices bring me to my third point. So it's the slide which talks about scientists and journalists. Why? Because, as I said, scientists in Nile media, in the coverage of the Nile by mainstream media, came only third after technical people, technical government officials, and politicians. So I would like to reflect and share some lessons learned on what happened or what should happen when journalists and researchers try to get together and collaborate. At the beginning of our project, we started by working on the differences, the difference between journalists and researchers, and started to think, okay, how can we bridge those two worlds, those two professions? How can we be such differences? For instance, differences in terms of time. For a researcher, it takes months or years to publish a research, while journalists have deadlines of hours or days or weeks if they are particularly lucky. So really big time difference. But then we also different of languages, of course, different in terms of audiences. But then we realized that also that journalists and researchers also share many things in common. And I think the main thing that they have in common is that they both journalists and researchers try to offer a representation of the reality. And if they're good scientists, if they're good researchers, they try to do it in the most accurate way possible. So thinking, how can we do this? So once we agree that that both journalists and researchers want to offer an accurate interpretation of the reality, what shall we do? I think first of all we have to reflect on our sources and also our limits. I think we have to make explicit also our position, our background. And thinking in terms of sources, for instance, we find that only 18% of the articles that we examined in our research were mentioned as a specific scientific report or study. But the almost none of these media report were providing a link to the study or even quoting the title of the study. Another interesting analysis we did, I think interesting, I hope, but I would like to share with you because I'm sure it can generate some discussion, and perhaps is about how journalists are represented in media coverage when it comes to rivers. So, Anamika, if you can go to the next slide. I just copy and paste the beginning of an email that I received last week from a journalist working for Al Jazeera. It's the slide that begins with "Hello, Professor." And why I posted it? Because I don't want to blame anyone, for sure. But I think that's for me, this is very telling on how often journalists represent scientists and researchers in the way they cover issues like Nile politics. So in particular, and that's what something that we find often in our in the articles and the media coverage that we analyze. So particularly, I'm looking at the third paragraph. We are looking to, and I'm reading it now, we are looking to have a 3-person panel discussion with 1 person representing Egypt, 1 person representing Ethiopia, and a 3rd representing a more bird's eye contextual position, yourself, namely which was me, an Italian living and working for an international institute in Europe, in the Netherlands. Why I like it? Because so we have one for Egypt, one for Ethiopia, and the bird's eye view from the external, a sort of independent observer. And this is something we also, and I will get back to this email, or you can do it by yourself, looking at these three figures of scientists in the media reporting that we found, we extracted. Of course, they don't exist as such. Those are ideal types that we recreated to identify some and reflect not only on how scientists are represented in the media, but also what kind of ideas of science do we have or are inform such representation. So the first character could be considered the minister. I came up with these three, with this religious metaphor, but there's not any double meaning in that. I think, I hope to clearly convey the message. So the minister is someone that preach the national catechism. So in this case, who are those experts? They are mostly national experts from one of the riparian country, remember the email of the journalist, one for Ethiopia, one for Egypt, to represent again, as it was one single way of looking at the river or at the dam for the entire country. So in this case, and how these ministers are used, often they present and legitimize specific claims and official discourse by government on the sharing and the management and the distribution of the Nile waters. I forgot to mention, while we were trying to detect whose voices are heard, and we sometimes it was very difficult to distinguish between the three categories, between politicians, between technical people, and between scientists and researchers. Because, for instance, many often a scientist can also work as a consultant or advisor for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or the Ministry of Water Resources. So is it interviewed as a researcher, as a scientist, or as a advisor and member of the delegation in the international negotiation? So anyway, this is the first category. A researcher that presents data that legitimizes a sort of national position, national interest.
Emanuele, I'm sorry, I'm interfering, but we are actually running out of time, so I want you to hurry up.
Okay, yes, that was my... okay, then the second is the prophet. In this case, interview, expert, and scientists are used to introduce new or different topics. And in this case, the scientist points, warn about issues that are missing from the debate, like, for instance, climate change. So here the scientist is perceived as someone that can see something that the layperson does not see, or someone that can speak on behalf of nature, of water. The third way is the one that I was asked to play, and here I call it God's eye view. So the observer that comes from outside, and also not just outside, but also from up, above, that can suggest pathways for conflict mediation and resolutions. And what is in, so for instance, a lawyer from a third country commenting on the principles and norms of international law that should be applied to negotiate, to mediate the conflict. Or another example is the reference and the use and the display of remote sensing, satellite image. These are also images and maps that convey the idea of a neutral and impartial representation of the physical world. So here science is represented as independent, neutral, above the parties. And sometimes even literally, like the case of the satellite or the remote sensing. So I don't know if, of course, these are three figures, types of characters that we found. Maybe there are more, or maybe sometimes the same person can play, is used to play different roles. But I think it would be, and I'm not saying that there's one good way or one bad way of using and representing scientists, but I think we should be more explicit and make a reflection about this. Am I really in the position of being the birds or God's eye on this? I have similar emotions, or I also have emotions and value when I'm looking at these issues, like someone from Ethiopia, someone from Egypt, and maybe looking at the disciplinary background should be more important than looking at national background. So let me conclude with the final slide, because it was also mentioned by Anamika, and I'm talking about the podcast that we did in our project, and why I'm pointing at this as a concluding remarks, because I would like to conclude when we work and we try to create opportunity of collaboration between journalists and research. I think we should reflect what kind of community do we want to build, who is our audience, and how to do that. And I think the podcast in our case proved to be an instrument, a versatile tool, relatively easy to set up, to allow different voices, as Anamika was saying, a plurality of voices that are not often heard in mainstream debates. So there was a sort, first of all, there was a recognition of different knowledge, of different authorities. People have the authorities to speak on these issues. So there was a sort of acknowledgement, recognition, that created and facilitated the establishment of relations between different people working in different disciplines, between journalists and researchers, between people working also in different countries or in different professional sectors. So we see such an instrument, for instance, something that can be easily put in place or also in other contexts, like the Brahmaputra. Perhaps more easily, our initial thought was, okay, let's have journalists and researchers working together at reporting. But that didn't work. Why inviting a journalist and inviting together with a researcher as guests in a podcast is much easier. And I think that's also, given the fact that podcasts are also rising and getting track in the academic world and are also very good journalist tool, I think this can be indeed a way, an instrument to facilitate the conversation. And my final remark is, I would like to conclude as a lesson learned to build such a community of practice between journalists and researchers, and creating alliance between journalists and researchers. I think, let me say my first three, recall my and recap my 3 main points. So first, we should acknowledge the role of culture, and we should acknowledge also our emotions that cannot be easily separated from facts and science. I don't trust someone that says, I don't have values, I don't have emotion, I don't feel emotion. I prefer these emotions to be visible, and then I can judge. Okay, I have all the instruments to judge the message that that person sent me. Second, power and politics. If we want to work for better coverage of water issues, ultimately we have to work for more freedom of expression. Remembering, as also Joydeep was saying, that is not that journalists are always good and politicians are always bad and scientists are always right. So that can be good and bad in each of this sector and profession. So what kind of alliance can we create? I think I would personally like to see alliance and collaboration with people that have a critical outlook on these issues, that are ready to think outside the box, and also acknowledging their own limitation. And how to create those alliances. There is a sentence that I learned while doing the podcast. It was an advice given by Mina Girgis, is the founder of the Nile Project, a collective of musicians from different Nile countries performing together. And he told me, we learn, we don't want to create a new music or a new Nile identity. What we do, the way we work, is we acknowledge the differences that exist between our different national music, difference in terms of instrument, of scales, of chords, and then once acknowledging and learning about the difference, we can create connections. So my wish also for this project is that we can think of such connections, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emanuele. It was definitely a very, very interesting presentation, and several things that you have mentioned. Cannot agree more, and I can so much relate it with the Brahmaputra Basin as well. So I think now the points that you have raised, particularly, you know, the emotion, popular culture, power, politics, and also the relationship between researchers and the scientists and the journalists, I don't really see that there is much difference if you look at these points, irrespective of which river basin you are talking about. Some of the things are so common. And I would now therefore hand over to Joydeep. And the interesting thing is that you have worked for Nile, and Joydeep has worked extensively in the South Asian river basin, be it Indus or it Brahmaputra. So I'm sure Joydeep will be able to relate these even better than I am doing. So over to you, Joydeep, for your remark on Emanuele's presentation. And thank you so much, Emanuele.
Thank you, Anamika, and thank you, Emanuele. Now, it is almost impossible to be a discussant after such a wide-ranging presentation, because if I start talking about everything that Emanuele spoke about, we will be here for the rest of the day. So let me see if I can try and pick on one or two of the points he has made. One, it's a very important point he has made, is the role of culture and emotions in rivers, and you can expand that to hydro diplomacy. Because there is one thing that we must all keep in mind when we're talking hydro diplomacy. We have to keep in mind that right from the Middle Ages, the nation state has been built on the basis of land borders. The whole concept of the nation state is on the basis of land borders, and rivers, transboundary rivers, do not follow land borders. They go from one country to another. And the history of nation states, their bureaucracies and their diplomats, of being able to negotiate between different sovereign states on transboundary rivers is extremely poor. Is extremely poor all over the world, is even poorer in South Asia. So we know that India and Nepal have 17 treaties on transboundary rivers. It is acknowledged by all researchers and experts in both India and Nepal that none of the 17 work. We know about all the problems that we have had for the last 9 years in getting India and Bangladesh, mainly India, to actually sign off on the Teesta Treaty. We know that the one positive example that we keep citing, that of the Indus Treaty between India and Pakistan, is constantly under threat by politicians. So given that, it is extremely important for us to give very serious thought to the points Emanuele makes on emotion, culture, because it is also our experience in South Asia that the only time transboundary river cooperation has actually worked is when people who actually live along that river and next to the border have cooperated. It's the only time that we have had successes and sustainable successes. We know there are many examples that I could give you. There's no time, but I'm sure many of you know about successful people-to-people cooperation between Bhutan and India on all the rivers that flow down from Bhutan into Kokrajhar part of Assam, very close to where many of you are in IIT Guwahati. Some of us know about all the flood warning systems that villagers of Nepal and India have figured out between themselves at the local level, and that's real cooperation on the ground. The point I'm leading up to is that only if you actually take emotion, culture, tradition, and local cooperation history into account will you be able to build up to a situation where governments can actually talk about transboundary rivers in a situation that is more than a zero-sum game. If you start with the government, the best situation outcome possible will be a zero-sum game. For the governments to get into anything more than a zero-sum game, they have to have the backing of the community. And there comes the role of the media to bring that backing of the community, that voice of the community, to the policymakers, to the politicians, to the diplomats. And that is one role that media can very usefully play. Please keep in mind that it is not the job of a journalist to play these roles. We are not diplomats, we are not policymakers, we are not scientists, we are not researchers. It's not part of our job. It's not part of our job to do hydro diplomacy. We are not diplomats. It's part of our job to report news. So when we find something that is working well in this situation, when we find something that where in a Nepal government and India government have 17 treaties that don't work, but the villagers across the border can actually get together and dig irrigation channels that help both villages across the countries, and that works. That's news. That is news, and that is the news that we can bring to hydro diplomacy. And after studying this for a large number of years, I can tell you that this probably is the way to go if you really want to have any sensible hydro diplomacy that actually works. That's the first point I wanted to make in response to what Emmanuel has said. Now, as Emmanuel pointed out, this is not without its risks. There are vested interests. There are strong vested interests in jingoism. And we have to understand that there are strong vested interests in jingoism, and that is why we get all these problems of policemen knocking at our doors, visas being refused, and most important, even worse than this, information being denied. We can handle the police, we can handle visa restrictions, but the biggest problem is when information is denied, because that's when we find it difficult to do our work. That is where sensible cooperation between researchers, independent scientists, and journalists can really play a role. I will not develop this because again there's no time. I'll go quickly to my last point, which is that this role of scientists, researchers, and journalists getting together is a much misunderstood role. The scientists and researchers are constantly telling us that you people misrepresent what we tell you. You are too shallow. While journalists, I don't know if non-journalists in this webinar are aware of this, journalists have an overwhelming point of view that most scientists and researchers are so boring, it's not worth talking to them. So, given that, there is good reason for both sides to understand one another, and it is only when we get beyond our preconceived notions that we'll be able to understand and work together. The most important thing that we as journalists want from scientists and researchers is data. Data is the big thing that we need. In South Asia, transboundary river data is classified, so we are not going to get it from the government. We are perfectly willing to run the risk of publishing classified data. That's fine. You don't have to worry about it, but to get us the data, we'll publish it. And because we know that it is not illegal, and if somebody takes us on, in authority tells us why have you published it, we know the answers. So that's not our problem. Our problem is actually getting the data. Talking about hydrodiplomacy and jingoistic journalistic coverage. You see, this is the first point I started to make at the beginning of this webinar. And this is why I said that I cannot hold a candle or defend every journalist. Because jingoistic journalism is actually possibly the simplest. It's the laziest form of journalism. Some politician or some so-called intelligence officer tells you something and you just write it down and publish it, and it's over and done with without checking. That is the laziest form of journalism, and I'm quite aware that it is quite common. But I think non-journalists need to understand that not all journalists are like this. Maybe half the journalists are like this, but there's the other half. So if you want to really work with the media, with communicators for successful hydrodiplomacy that will be of advantage to all the countries, all the riparian countries in any basin, whether it's Nile or the Brahmaputra, work with the good half. I think because of the time, I ought to stop here, right? Over to you, Anamika.
Thank you, Joydeep, for understanding the time constraint. Unfortunately, whenever this is an online webinar, there is always a technical hitch. It has been happening from day one we have started it. But thank you, Joydeep, for your input. And we have some questions. Before we go to the questions, one very important thing that I have observed over the years when you talk about journalism, that of course journalism has improved so much. It is not just that the journalist is just writing something. We also receive as academicians so many emails from journalists asking for information, data, that they want to do a research before they produce the outcome. And this is something very new. It is not just interviewing you and writing. They're also trying to have an opinion and put it up based on what they have actually seen or analyzed. And I think that's a very, very interesting change that I see. We have a few questions and we still have 10 minutes in our hands. So let me see if we can address some of the questions. So the questions are actually, I can put it for both of you, and both of you can very quickly respond to these questions. Joydeep, you mentioned about non-availability of data. This is also a question. So the journalists are asking you, and also Emanuele, when there is no data available, when or very limited data available, and also when several reports are not available in public domain, where it is supposed to be in public domain, how do you then go about it? How can we ensure that what we are reporting is really authentic, or it is really right? Is there a way to overcome this hurdle? Anyone, both of you can respond. If you have a quick response to this based on your experience, I think it will be very helpful for them.
Well, my response will be something that other journalists will know. So I think perhaps Emanuele's response will be more useful.
Okay,
to start with, at least to start with.
Yeah.
I can think of three quick responses. Of course, if perhaps the data, maybe the government don't want to disclose some data, but maybe sometimes I think there are also many data information in research that researchers or scientists are not trained to disseminate, to communicate outside the academia. So the first thing we can do is to go and dig for data inside academia, and try also, and that's why I think we have one part of the problem is to help and support a researcher and scientists in improving the communication of the research. Second, we are talking about data, but I was wondering what kind of data because as there's not one such a thing as journalists and the media, there's not science as a monolithic entity. There are many disciplines, for instance. So one of the problem, I know that journalists sometimes have limited space, especially in the press, but it would be nice if instead of quoting, presenting only the point of view and the data of one discipline, and usually is hydrology or engineering, we can combine and confront data from different disciplines. For instance, how a natural scientist see the river, the dam, compared to a social scientist or to an engineer. So you can also compare different kind of data. And indeed, the third thing that projects like this one, I think, should try to do is to help journalists, and thinking now, especially investigative journalists, to produce this kind of data. So supporting investigative journalists. We did it in the Nile Basin together with Africa Water journalists and the team of InfoNile, and I think there were also quite interesting reports, for instance, on the implication of oil production in Sudan in terms of water pollution and water quality that came up, and they were very interesting reports, investigative journalism report.
Right. I'll add very briefly to this. So, Emmanuel talked about scientists being trained. They should be trained about providing useful data to journalists. Flip this around, and you will realize that for most journalists, most of the time, most of the data they are looking for is actually available. They don't know where to look for it.
Mm.
So, data journalism webinars, courses, workshops are going on all the time. Please join those. It will really help. I'll give you an example from the Brahmaputra Valley in Assam. I am regularly asked by journalists in Guwahati, in Jorhat, in Dibrugarh, that, oh, we don't have any data on the water flow in the Brahmaputra. Yes, you don't have data on live water flow in the Brahmaputra because it's a transboundary river and the government of India keeps it secret. But the government of India does put out in the public domain water flow data that is 6 months old. I mean, it is in the public domain with a 6 month lag. You will find it in the website of the Ministry of Jal Shakti. So, and when I tell journalists this, they're very surprised, saying, "Oh, we didn't know that." So this is where joint meetings, workshops are important, and this is for hydrologist data, and for the other part of the data, it is a very important point that Emmanuel makes. We should definitely, as journalists, we should definitely be talking much more when we are doing water stories. We are talking to hydrologists, we are talking to dam builders, we are also talking to people being displaced by dams. So we are doing those stories. We need to talk to the anthropologists. We need to talk to the ecologists. We need to talk to the economists. We need to talk to the historians. If we do that, we'll have much better stories. Thanks.
Okay, thank you both. Another question, and I would also request both Joydeep and Emanuele, there are certain questions directly given from the panelists to both of you. So you can, if it is available for you also. So you can volunteer to answer some of them if I am missing any of the questions. What I'm trying to do is some of the questions are similar, so I'm trying to club them and I'm trying to ask you in that way. So there is a couple of questions where they're asking that traditional media versus the social media. Which one seems to be more effective? Or is it at some time is better that you use social media to countervail some of the newspaper, for example, reporting, because social media is faster than probably the other source? Emanuele, that you can also share from Nile perspective, because in your presentation you did show a lot of Twitter, things which were used for creating the narrative. So both of you, but very quick response so that I can take more questions. What is your view on this particular point?
Emmanuel?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would not draw such a sharp line between social media and mainstream media, because indeed what we call mainstream media also use social media. And I think this hashtag that went viral in Ethiopia, "It's my dam," it's a very interesting case that confirmed how social media and users and the audience contribute to produce or reproduce the what we consider the main narrative. So rather than looking at the in this case at the medium, which can allow, I would look at the objective, at the goal, at the approach of those kind of communication that I think should take place in different platforms. Now we cannot work outside, and we cannot work without social media and staying outside social media, but perhaps we can think of different platforms, and rather than thinking simply about the platform. I would rather think and create alliance between approaches, between goals, between values that we want to promote with in our work.
Yeah, I'll add to that by saying exactly the same thing. There is actually very little differentiation between so-called traditional media and social media today. Whether it's social media, whether it's a newspaper, whether it's a TV station, they're all on the internet. They're all coming to you through the internet. A newspaper report is coming to you through Twitter, through Facebook, through Instagram. And a Twitter, something that goes on Twitter is being taken by the newspaper or a television channel. So it's actually a complete intermeshing of all forms of media. So that dichotomy is becoming less and less true all the time.
Yeah. There is an interesting question, and this question actually is one I would ask to Emanuele as an academician, and the other to Joydeep from a journalist point of view. So to Emanuele, the question is that, is there something really called independent and free journalism? I mean, that there is no biasness at all, and that they're not representing a particular, what would I say, particular opinion that exists. So how, as an academician, you kind of go and really let them interview you and trust the kind of reporting that is going to come out? So that is to Emanuele. And similarly, I would like to ask, because a similar question is there for Joydeep too, where how do you really ensure, or how do you really make a researcher speak to you, who most of the time feels that they have all the information and very arrogant at sometimes too? So how do you kind of approach and make them convince them that the reporting will be done in the right way and the information is important to do the reporting? So to both of you, very quickly.
Emanuele?
What is, Emanuele, yeah, first Emanuele, please.
Well, very quickly, a very difficult question. In the past week, I've been working here with my students that are preparing their, and next week we will defend their thesis proposal. They will do research for 6 months for their master. And they're all concerned. They say, okay, but most of them have an engineer background. So they are told that science is something that is rigorous, is neutral. And then they engage with social scientists that are working in my department that show that a different approach. And so they are concerned, okay, but am I biased because of this, because this is my opinion? And then, so I think what I'm always telling to them, that even the fact of choosing your topic is already taking a position. So because of choosing this topic instead of another, can be for a journalist, can be for a scientist, you are already taking a position. So you're not neutral. I don't think that neutrality, as when we try to engage and to represent reality, exists. So what is important, I think, is to be honest and to be modest and to acknowledge where do we come from. That's why I'm always reluctant to accept those kind of invitation where I'm supposed to bring the bird high on an issue, which is on the Nile River. Of course, I'm not neutral in respect to that river, to the dam, which is built by an Italian company. It's called the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. My in-laws are from Florence, the birth of Renaissance. So I have feelings, I have emotions, and I have, of course, ideas about the dam, the Nile River. So I think it's important to acknowledge where do we come from and where do we want to go. And that's, for me, is a way of being independent.
Yeah, I completely agree. Objectivity is a myth. I know there is a lot of talk about journalists wanting ought to be objective, etc., etc. But complete objectivity is a myth. However, it is of course important for the journalist to get as many points of view as possible, even if it's a point of view that you do not agree with at all. I have done many stories on water pollution, where I have then gone and spoken to the owner of the factory from which the polluted water is coming. I have done stories on the problems caused by dams, where I've almost always, in fact, always reached out to the people who are building the dam, to the officials who have agreed to the dam, who have decided that the dam should happen. I may not feel that the dam is the best thing to happen. I may feel that they have taken a wrong decision, but they have a right to have their point of view said. Absolutely. Similarly, I think, and here I'm sorry, I'm digressing a bit, because there was a question which I don't see in the Q&A about writing or blogs or whatever by civil society organizations, and why that should that be seen as at par as journalism. Now it is obviously up to the audience to see whether they should consider it at par or whether they do not consider it at par. I can tell you that I do not consider it at par, just as I do not consider citizen journalism at par. Though civil society organizations are among the best sources of journalists, citizen journalists are among the best sources of journalists, I do not consider them at par because they are coming out to the overall environment, to the overall information environment, without any moderation, without anybody, without any checks and balances, without anybody editing it. So that is where the difference comes in, and it is good if the audience knows and understands the difference. It is very important for us journalists to remember that we are journalists, we are not activists. It's a thin line between the two, but it's important to stay on the journalistic side of that line.
Yeah, very good points from both of you. Thank you. There are some questions, but unfortunately we will not be able to take. I am actually trying to take more questions from the journalists, because this would actually really help this presentation that you made. Emanuele, if there is anything in particular you would like to respond to, seeing any of the questions that you would like to respond to, because there is a question from Filippo as well, but I'm thinking that probably you can personally respond to that question. So sorry, I'm not taking that question. And there is another question related to Lake Chad, but I somehow feel that probably it is something not so essential for us to respond. But if you would like to make a final comment very quickly, both of you, probably just giving half a second to both of you, meaning 1 minute together, please conclude, and then I will just thank the participants for their participation. Please go ahead quickly. Joydeep and Emanuele.
Emanuele first.
Okay.
Final points.
Final points. It's very difficult. You know, the Nile is the longest river in the world, and this is one of the longest research that I've been involved in, but also one that I really enjoyed a lot, because I've learned a lot. And indeed, I think I would like to conclude with by recalling this motto: acknowledging differences and creating connection, because I think it works very well between people coming from different professional background, people coming from different national background. And for me, there would be a good way of trying to escape what I see as one of the biggest obstacles today, which is the nation trap. I think media debates, the media, I think that's the lesson by Benedict Anderson, were instrumental and played a key role in creating those imagined communities that are the nations. I think we should try to, while acknowledging this, of course, it is there for a national background, we should try to escape such a trap. And sometimes we are creating ourselves our trap. We realize it while we were doing our research. We were dividing, so the Egyptians were looking at the Egyptian media, the Ethiopians at the Ethiopian media, the Sudanese at the, and we recreate the nation trap. Of course, language is a big issue, especially with the media, both to create the imagined communities, but also to create boundaries, as Joydeep was saying. So I think we should try to escape these nation traps. And for instance, the way we represent scientists and we ask scientists to comment in the media could be already a way of doing this. Instead of inviting the Egyptian to represent the Egypt positions, the Ethiopians to represent the Ethiopian position, perhaps we can think of inviting and dividing on the basis of the disciplines. Why not inviting an anthropologist, an engineer, an hydrologist, without caring about at least for once about the nation, and to escape the nation trap.
Yeah. Joydeep, when you are responding and giving your final comment, there is a question from one of the journalists, so I don't want to ignore it. And it is that, is it not also important that, so usually journalists try to definitely take both sides of the opinion as much as possible. Suppose we are talking to one party which has been kind of, verdict has been already passed.
I have typed my answer
you
to
have.
that.
Okay, go ahead. Please do try to make that point.
I know. Look, it's very simple. When we are talking about a river, the most important people that we must keep in mind are the people who live along that river. Far, far too often, those in charge of hydrodiplomacy, in power and in politics and in diplomacy, ignore that, forget that. It is our job as media people, as communicators, to make sure that the voices of the people reach the policymakers, and that policymakers take those voices into account. And that is how we can hold truth to account. Thanks.
Thank you, both of you, Joydeep and Emanuele, for such an interesting and engaging session. How do you actually know that this is an interesting and engaging session? When you see that number of attendees doesn't fall till the end. So I'm watching that, it hasn't fell, which means they're still here to listen to your last one. So thank you very much, both of you. And I would like to thank all the participants for all the interesting questions, because if they do not ask questions, the session is always boring. So thank you so much for participating and encouraging us to continue this webinar series. Before I end, let me just tell you that our next webinar is on gender and transboundary, and I hope to see you all back in a week's time. Thank you once again to both the speakers. I would also like to thank Vishakha, Arundhati, Darshana, Rupam, whose name you can see, but they are always behind the scene. They are the one who is coordinating everything and sending you all the webinar links, etc. So thanks for all their support. And a quick reaction to some of the questions that you have raised. We will share the videos after the entire series of webinar gets over. If you need a particular webinar, please send us an email. We will share it with you. So thank you once again, and have a good day, good evening. If it's a morning, then good day, and it's night, then it's good evening. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, Namika. Thank you, Joydeep, and to all the participants. Bye.
Hey, everybody. Thanks.